Okay, so let's tackle this challenge. Let's first set up, or I'm going to first set up a function. Start workout, right? We know we're going to pass it something, okay? What do we know we're going to pass it? We're going to pass it these things, right? So we could go ahead and also set up the call. So start workout. I'm going to pass it type, reps, and time. Cool. Okay. So based on my requirements, we wanted some things to operate or to display synchronously as soon as the user hit the submit, and some things asynchronously based on the time from a set timeout. But we want both of those to happen with a callback. Okay, so right here would have to be the callback. Okay, now I'm actually going to name the callback because I think it's good to do that. So I'm actually going to set up another function, one we've seen before. Okay, update DOM. Okay, I'm going to pass in a message and an element. Right? Okay, okay, so far so good. So down here then, let me just make this a little smaller so you can see it. So in addition to these arguments, I'm also going to pass it the update DOM. Now in this case, remember, you don't actually invoke it. You're just passing the reference to the function. Okay? Right? Now, okay. So we're passing that as a reference here. Sorry. So in here, we're going to have capture reps, type reps and time, but also this function reference. So I'm just going to call it fn because that's fairly common what you see it called. Fn is just a function call, which we know represents the reference to update DOM. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, we want to first synchronously output the time, right? The goal. Okay, so I'm going to end up copying just a little bit of content so you don't have to see me type so much. So the first thing I would do, because this inside of here, this is all synchronous code at this point. Okay. And I'm going to do an update to the DOM. And like I said before, and he said it in there, and I thought it was a really good point, is like you don't want you don't want your functions to do any more. They need to be very concise in what they do, and especially DOM updates. Let's do those outside. So what I would do here, right? I know I'm going to set timeout. I know I'm going to do that timeout, right? Now we see these written typically as, we could write them as regular standard functions, but arrow functions is kind of what we see them, right? And in this case, we're passing in time, but I had said, let's convert it to minutes. So we could either, now I'm going to just use 1,000 because I don't want to wait so long. I think it's 10,000 if you want to actually convert it to a minute. Okay. So outside of here, synchronous, right? Synchronous code. Inside of here, asynchronous code. Okay, so this is where now we're going to write. Okay, let's first do this one. That's because we have the function, right? So fn, which we know, fn, it wants to write function, right? What are we going to pass to it? We're going to pass the message, which happens to be a string, right? And I'm just pasting it. So I have a template string that references type, goal reps, right? Now what I also need to pass it is what I want as far as an element. Okay. Oop, my bad. Wow, that really did. That's what happens when you try to type encode. So I'm passing in the message, I'm passing in the type of element I want. And so in here, relatively simple what I need to do. Okay. I'm going to say new element, going to be equal to document dot create element. And what am I going to create? I'm going to create whatever's passed into it. Oh, yeah, where's my semicolons? I got to fix that. I changed computers. It must have lost that automatic. Okay, so then I'm going to do new element. And this is stuff we've seen, text content equal to whatever that message is, right? Whatever's passed in is the message. Again, you could have wrote two functions here, but I like just writing one. Doesn't matter if it's called synchronously or asynchronously. Okay, that part doesn't matter. And then I'd say output because that's the div I've set up, right? Append child. What would I append is the new element. Okay. So probably a good time to test before we write this part, just to see if it's outputting, right? So if we say pull-ups, we're going to do 10 of them. Now this part, let's see if we get any error message. We know there's no synchronous part of the code yet. Sorry, asynchronous. We know the synchronous code is working, so it's outputting that, which is good. So now all we have to do here, now that we've written that function, is type fn and whatever we want to come out, right? So in my case, I'm going to say template string. I'm just going to pass or set up a string that has the type, call it a h1 so it's a little more clear. And so this code will only run once the time is expired. Okay, so let's now see if that works. Pull-ups are hard. Okay, one. Boom. Oh, that's awesome, right? So once you see it, right, again, the key to this exercise was you wanted the DOM updates to happen not inside. You wanted them to have a whole separate function for them, right? You did want to use the set timeout. You wanted to understand the asynchronous versus the synchronous concepts, right? Okay, so here's what you want to do now, right? Is commit, and this is part of what I was talking about before, is like in your README file, I want you to think about like what else could we do? There's so much we could do with this, right? There's so much we could play with this code, right? Because imagine, right, you might want to have a countdown. Like, how would you do that? Right? Imagine. So I just want you to think about, I shouldn't actually give you ideas. I want you to think about, and I'm not sure if we're going to use this more. We might actually use it on next week, because we're going to actually, sorry, the next item, which we're going to talk about, promises, would be a good one to think about how to use this for promises. But what kind of functionality can you think of we could use for this, right? We could use some audio, sound. God, look at me telling you ways. I want you to think. So in your README file, right, the last thing I want you to do here is like update. Like give me, put a heading in there that says like ideas to further the functionality of this app. Okay, and then commit that, right? So in this case, I was saying, here's the solution if you code it along with me, and commit, code it along. Right? Otherwise, you can just say, right, in your README file, if you had a working solution, you could just tell me I didn't need to do this commit because I had a working solution, and here's my ideas. I'd be interested to see, because there's many ways you could have done this, but again, make sure that it meets the requirements that I gave you. Hope you had fun with this. Let's move on to the next one. Just give me your commit history URL.